Mighty wrap your hands around my waist and bury your face in it around while you decide it. No, deny my soul and let you find. I want you to touch my body, let's get it. Mighty wrap your hands around my waist and bury your face in it around while you decide it. No, deny my soul and let you find.
Welcome back to another episode of the Psycho Podcast. I'm your host, Margot Underwood, and this is a place where I have the pleasure of interviewing specialists, authors, doctors, psychologists on the topics of human sexuality. This is a place where we break stigmas and bust hymens, deconstruct taboos, initiate more self-pleasure in our lives, expose alternative therapies to approach these sensitive topics. Thanks for joining me here. In today's episode, we are once again joined by the lovely Dr. Darrel Ray, author of Sex and God, founder of recoveringfromreligion.org and the Secular Therapy Project. He started Recovering from Religion podcast as well as the Secular Sexuality podcasts. So if you're really trying to dive deep into these topics, go search out for his books, which will be posted in the link below, as well as his foundations. Today, we're going to cover why religion and sexuality are so intrinsically connected, how religion dominates our language, thinking patterns, sexuality, as well as social conditionings. We're going to touch on topics such as the hidden estrus, why it's important, and what it is. We also cover the topic of pair bonding, which is why we inherently choose certain partners to be sexual with and intimate with over strangers. So we have a lot to cover today, and let's go ahead and jump into it. All right. So
we're going to talk about sex today, my favorite topic.
Sex,
Thank
baby.
you.
Gonna talk about you and me. Okay, yeah, so our favorite topics. And something that I've been so curious about, but never really had someone to ask this question to. In your words, how do you feel like religion affects our sexuality overall?
Margot, I think it just dominates our sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And within our culture, and within especially within any patriarchal culture,
mm-hmm.
because what it does, it sets an agenda that's of course male dominated from the day you're born, and that's going to fuck up people's lives. It's going to mean women's sexuality is always put second or fifth, and male sexuality is going to be skewed towards crazy things that are damaging to the ability to create healthy sexual relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So, it leads to misogyny. It leads to males in the incel movement. I'm actually in the process of writing an article right now on how much the purity culture has gotten into the men's rights movement. And the notion of purity pervades things like QAnon
mm-hmm.
and other crazy conspiracy theory stuff. There's a hell of a lot of misogyny in those. And I asked the question, where did that come from? Well, it came from religious ideas about virginity, female purity, male dominance. All these things are really, really prevalent in our culture. And they all come from Christian religion, of course.
That's really interesting that you brought up QAnon, because I know quite a few people who are believers, I guess is the best way to put it. And they have been or are very heavily influenced by religion.
Yeah, it is a cult. QAnon is a cult. It meets a lot of the definitions of a cult.
Yeah, it's
just a modern cult. It's an internet cult. We didn't have the internet 50 years ago, so we didn't have internet cults. I think we're seeing those now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite actually. I kind of made that connection, but they don't preach religion in QAnon directly.
Right.
It's more indirect messages.
Yeah. Right. But
Interesting.
those indirect messages are very sexually oriented. I mean, we don't think of it as sexual, but if you just watch the notion of cuckolding. That's a sexual notion, if you think about it.
Absolutely.
And how much do QAnon people, I mean, the greatest insult they can do to somebody, another person, another male identified person, is to call them a cuck. I mean, that's supposedly an insult. Yeah, oh yeah. And just look at the whole QAnon literature. It's full of references to cucks. In other words, anybody that disagrees with us, anybody that doesn't believe in the conspiracy theory is probably a cuckold. And they don't know how to control. And well, what is a cuckold? A cuckold is a man that doesn't know how to control a woman. I mean, we get it from, I don't know if you know the roots of the term cuckold.
I don't know the roots. Would you like to explain?
Yeah, a cuckoo. The bird cuckoo. Cuckoos do not build their own nests. What a cuckoo does is invades the forest and finds an appropriate nest of another bird, lays its eggs in the other bird's nest, and then flies off. Doesn't take care of the baby. When the baby hatches, the baby then crowds out the legitimate eggs and the legitimate babies, fledglings in the nest. The mother comes to feed, and she bonds to whatever's in that nest. Well, if it's a bird that's twice or three times as big as a baby should be, they don't even notice. So they end up feeding the biggest, loudest bird, which is really a cuckoo baby. And the other two babies that are in the nest, or three babies, literally get shoved out. The cuckoo pushes the eggs out or pushes the other babies out. So there's only one baby left in the nest, and that's the cuckoo baby. And that's where we get the word cuckold. Because another man or another nest, another female, another entity is raising those eggs. And the female is not taking care of the babies in this case. But the word cuck comes from that. And there's other species that do similar kinds of things. It's actually more common in birds than anybody knew. There's the cowbird does the same thing, lays eggs in somebody else's nest and then flies off. So yeah, that's what it. So if in QAnon, when you want to insult somebody, you call them a cuck. And it implies a very misogynistic sexual idea that men should be in charge of women, and a cuck is a man that can't control his women.
That's fucked
pretty
up.
Simple idea. Yeah, and that is fucked up because that's pretty much fundamental QAnon ideology.
Wow.
Period. Just look at how many times they use the word cuck, how many times they insult each other with that word, and every time they say it, they're saying you're a man that can't control women. Now, there's a reason why the whole cuckold idea is mostly not cuckold. QAnon is largely male. I mean, look at who rioted on the Capitol steps. It was probably 10 men for every one woman. And male dominance is just pervasive among those most movements.
So anyway. Interesting. Now I have a question for my friends about this whole cuckolding thing.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, especially since they're so sexually suppressed. It's like,
oh, they are.
They don't even know that that's so crazy. Which leads me to why would religion even want to influence or control our sexualities in the first place? What kind of power does that give them over us?
It does. Well, if you can control someone's sexuality, you can control them. It's almost that simple. People have an incredibly strong sex drive.
That's true.
I mean, at almost everybody. Not everybody. I mean, there are legitimately people who don't have a strong sex drive or asexual or, any number of other combinations. But our sex drive is strong no matter what that, quote, combination is oftentimes. And what religion learned thousands of years ago was if you can control the sexuality of a person, then you can control much more about that person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about this. The most perverted sexual act I can think of is a celibate priest or nun. That is fucking perverted.
Why?
Because it goes against everything nature wants.
It's true.
You are, as a priest or a nun, you're basically saying, I will not reproduce.
Yeah.
Well, why won't you reproduce? Because I'm not, my interest is not in reproducing biologically. The interest is in reproducing religiously.
Uh-huh.
I want to reproduce as many Catholic people as I can, and I do that best by becoming a priest or a nun.
And not giving your, I guess, attention away to these pleasures, these worldly pleasures.
Exactly. Right? Sexual energy is now diverted and focused on God,
mm-hmm.
supposedly.
Very
now,
strange.
Of course, the priest still has the priest or the nun still has the sexual energy. What are they going to do with that? Well, they're going to go out and molest little boys or rape girls or, that sort of stuff.
Uh-huh.
So the sexual energy will get expressed some way, and it's usually inappropriately.
Mm.
Supposedly, it's being focused on God. And, I mean, think about this. There's nuns that think they're married to Jesus. Isn't that a sexual notion?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean...
the notion of virginity is a sexual notion.
Mm-hmm.
It's a religious sexual notion. There's no such thing as virginity. There's no concept or need for a concept in biology of virginity. And, oh, by the way, we don't have male virgins. We only seem to have female virgins. So if the notion of not having had sex before defines a virgin, then males and females both are virgins. Of course, we joke about that, but that's a fact. There's no need for that in biology. So it's a religious notion, period. So you're asking the question, where does religion impact our sex lives? From the day you hear the word virgin or sooner.
Right? Like, don't have sex before you get married, which I have kind of an offhand question here, but have you, I'm sure you have come across this concept that, and I don't mean to generalize, but I'm going to, there are certain men or women, but mostly men, who like to have two partners. And one is this pure and angelic, like never, doesn't have sex, quote unquote, with other people or just them. And then they have this dirty little slut that they keep separate. And I actually know a few people in my life who participate in this. And I called one of them out the other day and I was like, you kind of look like you're doing this thing. And I want to understand the psychology behind that as to, why some people feel the need to have this pure, and then separate it from this dirty little slut that they still want.
I actually did an entire podcast on my podcast about 4 years ago it's called the Madonna Whore Complex.
Right. Okay.
Have you've heard it before, right? Madonna Whore.
Yes.
It's as most commonly found among Catholic men or those raised under Catholic influence. You don't see the Madonna Whore among people raised in Baptists or Buddhists or you do see it a little bit among, or you do see it, not a little bit, you do see it among Muslim men as well. But it comes from the notion of female purity, and you're raised to say that women are, you put women on a pedestal. Women can't like sex. Women shouldn't have sex. Any woman that has sex outside marriage is a slut and all that. Well, it's like, you can't have that candy that's in the drawer. That's just, I got a whole stash of chocolate candy in one of my drawers. And I tell my girlfriend, you can't have that chocolate candy in that drawer. And what happens? Within a week, it's all gone, and I didn't get any of it. And if it's not there, she'll say, where'd you hide the chocolate? Well, the fact is, when you tell somebody they can't have something, that makes it very attractive.
Yeah.
So the slut, kind of the slut side of that is, oh, that's the dirty, forbidden side, and then the Madonna is the virginal, innocent side. Well, both have their attractions, and I did actually know couples, and it's almost the Madonna whore is perpetuated by males. It's I've never seen it in a female.
Okay.
I'm just saying. Maybe it has. I don't know, but I think men can be sluts and whores probably too, but I just don't see it.
Absolutely.
So what happens is the man feels this incredible need. I in order to be what my mother taught me to be, what my church taught me to be, I have to marry the Madonna. I have to marry the innocent, that sort of. But I also want the forbidden. So I'm going to go over here and find, quote, the slut, the whore, and I'm going to keep them apart because it's a sin to commit adultery, of course, or have sex outside of marriage or whatever. And I can't let these two people know about it. Well, that's not ethical non-monogamy. That's just fucking cheating is what it is. And I'm all about ethical non-monogamy. And if somebody wants to play the Madonna whore thing, I actually have a friend whose wife, he and his wife do this. She plays the whore sometimes. She plays the Madonna sometimes. But it's the same person. And but they're open about it. And they actually negotiate how that all is going to come about. It's kind of a kink, if you think.
I love it.
And I know people. I mean, I know men who are polyamorous. I know lots of men and women that are polyamorous, and they kind of do that. But it's all known.
Yeah,
it's up front.
Of course. Yes.
I even went to a BDSM conference one time. And this is the ultimate. They had a dress-up night. One of the two nights was a dress-up night at the BDSM conference. And during the day, you're going to demonstrations and lectures and stuff on different, and demonstration on how to flog somebody or how to use fire play and that sort of stuff. Well, that evening there was a dress-up, and I was really interested in this triad. It was a guy and two women. And that evening, one of the women's dressed up like a nun, and the other was definitely dressed up like a whore.
Love that.
So, of course, I was down curious about it. They said, "Yep, that's the way we play our kink. She's always the whore, and she's always the nun." But no nun.
Oh, the nun, right?
There's a difference between a nun and an angel. Because this nun was very sexual, but she, it was fun to have sex with her habit on. She had her habit on, and she would have sex with her habit on. And of course, yeah. So people can act these things out ethically,
right?
And that was what they were doing, and it was great. I loved it. It was funny and fun to watch them do it. It's not my kink, but it was fun to watch somebody else.
Of course, I would. I mean, that's psychology manifesting in physical form in front of your face. It's your life's work. That's awesome.
Right.
Let's see.
So I just want to emphasize that from the day you're born into a religion, or you're at least born into a religious culture. And that culture, if it's Catholic, for example, starts teaching you about the Madonna, about the virgin birth, the purity of the female, and that sort of stuff. And men pick this up, and in a patriarchal culture where men are taught from the day they're born that you have to be dominant, or you're a cuck. I mean, that's basically what QAnon people. There's so many purity kinds of things coming into kids at a very young age, and it really affects them when they get to be teenagers, and they're starting to have sexual feelings and wanting to masturbate, and they're being told, well, if you masturbate, you're sinning, and so that creates all sorts of short circuits in the brain, and kids. I mean, I see kids. I have known over my career kids getting virtually suicidal over their masturbatory urges.
I bet.
And where would you Where would you be so disturbed that you would want to kill yourself over masturbating? Only if you were taught that is a mortal sin, you're going to hell for having done it. A
So much
perfectly fucking
shame.
normal thing that any 12, 13, 14-year-old boy or girl is going to do. So this is deep stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can get a 12 or 13-year-old person feeling that bad about their body, I mean, think about it. From the day you're born, you're told your body is your enemy,
Mm-hmm.
that you shouldn't listen to your body, that you should, Paul even says you should kill your own body in the name of God, kill your desires, so to speak. So there's a lot of religion that comes around this. And I'm guessing whether you were raised religious or not, you still heard these things.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's in our schools. So I had this really interesting conversation with someone the other night. I used the word, I kind of announced to the table that one of my favorite words is cunt. And I just really like where it comes from in my throat. It just sounds good. I like to give it that power back, because it's been taken away from us for so long. And this woman got super offended. So has religion kind of taken control over all those types of curse words in a way? Like where do you feel like that offensive energy was coming from? Because she felt like it was a really degrading word. And I think it can be if the intention behind it is, malicious. But, I think I'm kind of a button pusher. Oops. It's kind of my downfall at times. But by the end of the night, she asked for my number and everything was good. But I'm just kind of wondering.
Have you actually talked to her?
She texted me. We were connecting, but it was kind of I was introducing her to I want to introduce her and her partner to the dungeon here in town, and they were really interested in BDSM. So I was just kind of giving them a lowdown on what I do. So they were, really, really interested. And that was after the whole cunt conversation. She was trying to justify this, like, well, she can call guys dicks, but she won't call women cunts. And I was like, well, that feels like there's a little dissonance happening right there.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah, it was really weird.
Yeah.
I was trying to wrap my brain around it, and having this conversation with you, I'm like, is that religiously influenced?
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Of course. Where would you get the whole idea that any of this stuff is wrong?
Right.
I mean, where?
Yeah, like
we are
cunt is dirty. I'm like, well, what? I like cunt.
Yeah. Well, think about all the words that were dirty 50, 100 years ago.
Right.
I mean, I could sit here and use the word fuck. I mean, it's still inappropriate in a lot of circles, but but I use it. And 50 years ago, I'd have been drummed out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
My mother would have washed my mouth out with soap and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's language changes, and language is influenced by religion, and we are constantly seeing religion redefine what is appropriate, what's not appropriate, because religion has to keep up with as I write in my book, The God Virus. Religion is a parasitic infection,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets in our brains, and it wants to own our brains, and then it wants to move from one brain to the next brain, just like a virus does, just like the COVID wants to do, or a brain virus or another virus that affects the nervous system is rabies. Rabies once gets from me to you. Well, religion is constantly having to change, though, because we have immunity. We gain immunity to things. I mean, we gain immunity to other religious infections. If a Jehovah's Witness knocks on your door, they're trying to sneeze on you and give you their God virus. But you've probably got a pretty high resistance. You've got immunity. Another religion comes to your door, and in the form of maybe QAnon, and comes at you at an angle that you weren't expecting, you might get infected with that and then become a cult member.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Scientology does. It says, hey, come over here and take our little test at the table at the grocery store and see if you're under stress. Well, of course, you're going to be under stress. And they're going to show you how to get out of it. And before you know it, you're giving $100,000 over a 10-year period to Scientology. It happens. It happens over and over again. So cults, it's an infection, and religions, in order to be able to infect more people, they have to modify, they have to mutate, they have to evolve.
Yeah.
I mean, the Catholic religion of today looks nothing like the Catholic religion of 1450.
That's so true.
Yeah, it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
The Baptist Church in 1840, the Southern Baptist Church was created out of the Baptist Church in around 1840 over the issue of slavery. There was a Northern Baptist and a Southern Baptist. They split. And the Southern Baptists kept slavery. They weren't against it. Until 1970, they didn't even take the issue of slavery out of their charter. The Southern Baptists still had positive slave language in their charter in 1970. So you can see that Baptist churches evolved a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, religious language evolves as well. And what was inappropriate 100 years ago is now okay today, or less offensive. I mean, you see these preachers getting up front and using what, quote, inappropriate language more than you ever saw 50 years ago. You'll even hear a preacher from the pulpit use the word damn occasionally now.
Yeah. Actually,
well, that was unheard of.
Yeah.
Unheard of 50 or 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, they have to evolve to stay alive.
Keep relevant.
Yeah, to stay relevant.
Yeah, to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
The religion that doesn't evolve is dead. If you think about it, there's of all the species on the planet, probably 99.9% of all the species that ever existed on the planet are extinct. We're the 0.001 species that have survived. Well, the religion's the same way. Think how many religions are extinct today. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of religions are now dead, and we'll never know anything about them. They died 10,000 years ago, or they died 1,000 years ago. I mean, the Shakers are pretty much a dead religion. They lasted for about 150 years. Mormons are a dying religion, but they started back in 1838. But they're going downhill real quick at this point in time. Jehovah's Witnesses started about the same time, and they're going downhill pretty fast. So I think we'll see a extinct Jehovah's Witness within 50 years. Probably take another 50 years to kill off Mormons.
Oh my gosh. That's fascinating. I hope someone hears that. I hope a Jehovah's Witness hears that and they're like, hey, mutiny. I wonder how kind of Christianity is going. I mean, that's the only one I can really think of right now in terms of evolving with this kind of sexual revolution that's happening right now. And I mean, we had a revolution in the 70s when it came to the whole free love movement and stuff. Did you notice, like, in your research where religion has evolved in that aspect in terms of evolving with sexuality to kind of keep people attracted?
Yeah. Look what happened in the late 70s, early 80s with the beginning of the religious right. And Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, those were all the religious right movement founders. And from that came the purity culture. And purity culture is just a religious idea that it's an old idea repackaged, that women should stay virgins until marriage, that women should dress modestly, that they shouldn't have sex, and they shouldn't enjoy sex. All those things come out of purity culture. And that men should have control of their daughters. I mean, remember, I don't know, it's not been that long ago, they're having those purity dances where the father would go with his daughter to a purity dance, put a ring on the daughter's finger, and make her promise that she wouldn't have sex until she got married. That's not been that many years ago, and those were popular. They're still probably going on. I'm just not aware of where they are.
Right. That's weird.
But the whole purity culture thing then moved into schools where they wanted to fight sex education. So what they did was they created what appeared to be a secular sex education program that was really purity culture. And it basically taught that, remember that, you probably heard about it, abstinence only bullshit. That's just purity culture stuff. And they would talk about chewing gum, If you wouldn't chew somebody else's gum, well, why would you want to have sex with a woman who's already had sex? She's been chewed up. Yeah, it's awful. It's horrible. It's so misogynistic. It's so male dominated, and just very disrespectful, and frankly ignorant about human sexuality. So let me back way up, because you haven't asked this question, but I want to get to this angle. I wrote my book, Sex and God, with the sole purpose of saying, let's go back and look at what sex would be like if we didn't have this crazy religion around us. What does sex look like before Western culture? What did sex look like before Muhammad, before Jesus, before Moses, before Zoroaster? Each one of those gets older and older. Zoroaster predated Moses. And so we got 4 different major leaders. What was sex like before those 4 major leaders came on the scene? Because all 4 of those leaders preached misogynistic, male-dominated sexuality. How do you do that? Well, you have to go back about 10,000 years before any of these religions were made, or there's an alternative. You go to places that haven't been strongly influenced by Western culture, like the Hadza of East Africa, or the Muoso of China, or the Manganian tribes in the southern Pacific. So these are peoples that have been fairly isolated. I won't say they haven't been influenced, but they have resisted the influence. And they've got sexual practices that are so different. For example, the Muoso, there's no word for father. There's no word for husband or wife, because there's no marriage in that culture. The woman stays in the compound of her birth. And brothers, when they get of age, leave. Brothers have to leave the compound and go find a wife, go find a place to live somewhere else. Daughters, women, stay in the compound. Uncles uncles become the father figure. There's no father in there because they don't. A woman can have as many sex partners as she wants in the Muoso culture. And so when a child becomes 13 or 14, has her first menstrual cycle, she goes from being a child to being a woman overnight. It's the menstrual cycle that defines what a woman is. There is no adolescence. So at the time the woman has that cycle, then she now is a woman. She can have as many lovers as she wants. She gets a door to the outside of the compound. She can invite men in. There's only one rule. The man has to be out before breakfast. The men may not stay any longer than that. They have to go back. You may walk 20 miles to get back home, but that's the culture. And that nobody gets married. If you ask a woman, who's the father of this child, she'd laugh at you. There's nobody. I don't know. I've had sex with 10 guys this last year. How would I know? It's unimportant to them. So think about that. How does that contrast with Catholic sex or Mormon sex?
And it's really fascinating too, because it takes why do you feel like, what kind of impact does that have on a child's development? I feel like it would be kind of a positive thing. And is that more of like a matriarchal way of matriarchal run society rather than patriarchal?
Yeah, it's more matriarchal, but it's more matrilineal. The males of the compound do have a say. It's not like the females. There's very few so-called matriarchal cultures on the planet. Have been a few probably, but there's certainly for example, a really interesting, fascinating, I think, the 5 civilized tribes, so-called civilized tribes in North America, especially the Iroquois, had a tradition or an approach that was kind of matriarchal. They had a matrilineal. You know the difference between matriarchal and matrilineal?
No, can you please explain that?
Okay. Yeah, matriarchal means governed by. The woman is the head of the household, so to speak, or head of the culture. Matrilineal means you trace your lineage through the female. Jewish culture is patriarchal, but matrilineal. You trace your lineage in the Jewish culture through the woman.
Okay.
You cannot be a born Jew unless you were born of a woman. Period. So if you trace back through women, you're a Jew. So anyway, that's kind of neither here nor there. So a in the Iroquois, only women could vote, and only men could serve in political office. So when it comes time to elect the president, they had a 5-person president. Each tribe elected one president, and they became the governors, the so-called chiefs of all the tribes. If you were up for election as a chief, it was the women that voted. So if the men want to run for office, they're going to have to get the women's vote.
Right.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I like that.
Only men could serve, but only women could vote.
It's interesting.
Now, I'm not advocating that that's the right way to do anything, but it's a different way.
Yeah.
And it really ensures that women get their say. I mean, how do you have a male-dominated culture? How do you go to war if women don't want to go to war? You know. Now, don't get me wrong. Iroquois were a very warlike tribe, and they dominated. The 5 civilized tribes dominated all of the Northeast. This is before Western culture came in. I want to go to another place. Think about this. Before Western influence, the Iroquois and other tribes would live in longhouses. And these are huge log constructions that, might be 50, 60, 100 feet long. And multiple families would live in there. And there's necessarily no dividing. So if you want to have sex, how do you have sex? Well, you go over into your particular part of the thing and you start having sex. And if somebody walks by seeing you having sex, they just ignore you. It's no big deal. Sex in many cultures is semi-public.
Yeah.
In the sense that you can have all the sex you want. The rest of the tribe just ignores you when you're enjoying yourself.
Yeah. I mean, makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to, when I go to the clubs and I see other people having sex, it's kind of just like, yeah, okay. What's going on over there? What's going on over there? Like, I want it to be so normalized. It's like, because it is just another thing. And it's also kind of beautiful to watch too. Everyone has their own, preferences and likes and dislikes.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend last night about the how we function as a society off of a 24-hour male hormonal cycle, and and what it would be like if we were functioning off of a 28-day cycle, and then really what it came down to was okay, we are a patriarchal society. What would it look like if we were a matriarchal society? Have you ever contemplated that?
Yeah, actually, if you think about it, almost every species on the planet goes on the female cycle. Mm-hmm. There's only 5, last count, there's only 5 species on the planet that we know of that have hidden estrus. Are you familiar with the term of hidden estrus? Okay, a chimpanzee, when the female is in quote in heat or is fertile, her butt turns bright red, and everybody in the tribe knows she's fertile and ready to have her eggs fertilized. That's what most of the species on the planet do. At nighttime, when you go out and you listen to the birds singing in the day, or you listen to the crickets singing at night, they're all singing to get laid. That's almost the whole reason for a cricket to sing or a locust. They're trying to get laid. And the only time they're going to get laid is when the female is fertile. And it's the only time females are going to let the male mate with them. So only five species don't advertise that the female's fertile, and we are one of them. We're not totally sure why, but it seems to be really important to our species to hide when the female is fertile. But what that also means is we can have sex anytime we want to. And that seems to have something to do with keeping the pair bond, because it takes so much longer to bring a child, to wean a child and bring a child to self-sufficiency. You absolutely need support until the child is about 5 years old. Without that, the child's probably going to die. So if you can keep the man involved for 4 or 5 years, then and protecting the child until they're somewhat independent, then that child's probably going to survive. So it may have to do with, well, you can't hold the interest of the man if the woman's not open to having sex. There's no way to keep the pair bond going. That I'm not sure that's always true, because we do know other species pair bond. In fact, lots of birds pair bond, but they're not monogamous. There's a difference between pair bonding and monogamous. And we know they're not monogamous because if you do the DNA of the swan or the goose, who's famous for being pair bonded, you'll find out that many of those eggs are by somebody else. Again, cuckolding, if you will. The female went off and had sex with another man, and now she's laying that other man's eggs, and this man is having to deal with the eggs. There's a great book called The Myth of Monogamy, written about 15 years ago by Lipton and Barash, a man-wife team of, I can't remember if they're biologists. One's a biologist, one's a psychiatrist, I think. Fascinating book. But here's the deal. I can look up here. Helen Fisher.
Sounds really familiar.
Helen Fisher wrote a book years ago, and she documented, she's an anthropologist. She documented that the highest divorce rate is somewhere around 4 or 5 years. Well, if you see a pattern in a culture that shows that the pair bonding is being broken at about 4 or 5 years, and the symbol of that is divorce, then you start asking the question, I wonder if there's a biological reason for that.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, there is a biological reason. You've heard of new relationship energy?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we all love it. It's great. And it's when that oxytocin is flowing and we're getting all sorts of dopamine and all things are happening in response to our mate. I can just look at my mate and get a shot of dopamine. I can just look at my mate, and feel the love, which is really oxytocin coming out probably. Well, this lasts for about 4 or 5 years. Now we even have a saying in our culture, the honeymoon phase.
Right.
We call it the honeymoon phase. Well, the honeymoon phase is the phase where the pair bond is happening. If you look at it biologically, it's getting the two people together. It's getting the baby born. It's keeping the two people together. And what we see is the testosterone in male humans decreases dramatically after the birth of a baby and stays low for quite a while and then may start coming back up. Why would testosterone go down after the birth of a baby? Because you need the man to stick around. You don't want a horny guy running out, screwing too many other people, because then he won't help the woman take care of the baby. So we have some good, pretty strong evidence that hidden estrus is there, evolutionarily evolved to keep the man and the woman together long enough to get the baby. So as long as you keep having sex during that time, you'll keep bringing the oxytocin back. Now, if you put an oxytocin blocker in, the testosterone comes back. If you put there's other species that voles. There's a monogamous vole. Been a very interesting experiment for years on this. if you put an oxytocin blocker in there, the voles don't bond, and the male becomes quite promiscuous. If you do the opposite and increase the oxytocin, a species of vole that does not pair bond will start pair bonding. So we can manipulate pair bonding just by manipulating something, a chemical like oxytocin.
A hormone. Okay.
Now, what's all that got to do with religion? We'll come back to that, but I just want to throw that out.
Well, I mean, monogamy is, you brought up the myth of monogamy. And
right.
I've heard, I know-ish, that monogamy is a somewhat new concept in our society.
It's a new concept to humans.
Okay.
Period. Yeah, it's not been around that long.
Yeah. And that's, like you were saying, these other cultures, they don't practice monogamy.
Right,
so,
right. And neither do we. We don't practice monogamy either.
No matter how much you think you do, you're really not, because you are, you cannot stop that natural, attraction to other people. Even if you're in a relationship with someone, and then, of course, the more you deny it, the more you're lying to yourself, and you're, slowly going down this avalanche of creating distrust.
Well, there's you're putting a moral slant to it that comes from our culture. Let me go back and put a biological slant to it. The notion of monogamy, if you look at it from a biological standpoint, or in some ways a religious standpoint, the definition of monogamy is one sex partner for life. Period. There's a fish called the anglerfish. The female is gigantic. The male is really small. When they mate, the male embeds himself, literally drills in, embeds himself into the skin of the female, and kind of much dissolves and leaves his gonads intact. And that's monogamy. He's there the rest of his life.
Right.
That's one sex partner for life for the guy. Now, there might be other males come in. I don't know. But I was doing a talk one time and I said, monogamy is one sex partner for life. And the anglerfish, here's the way they work. After my talk, a woman came up to me and said, that story about the anglerfish and embedding yourself? My ex-husband was like that. So here's the deal. Monogamy is one sex partner for life.
Yeah.
In my talks, I might have 200-300 people in my talks. And during the talk, I will ask, how many of you know someone who's monogamous? And I'll get quite a few people raising their hand, maybe half the people raise their hand. And then I'll ask this simple question. If it's not you, how would you know? Because many, many people lie about their sexual history. We have tons of evidence that people lie about their sexual history. Yeah. If you've had two sex partners in your life, you're not monogamous by definition.
I see.
Even if we let's say you have a spouse die and you remarry. Okay, I'll give you that. You could still be, quote, monogamous. But that's not what I'm talking about. The Hadza culture has a practice, and I'll call it a practice, but it's not conscious. Women tend to mate with one man and stay with that man for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
After she gets tired of him, she kicks him out and she takes in another man. She might have 5, 10, 15, quote, husbands in a lifetime. That's just the way they do it. But if you look at it, that seems to match the 4 or 5 year cycle of a honeymoon, if you will. The pair bonding, long enough to get a child up to independence, and then you split and have a baby with another man. That makes more sense genetically for women than having one man constantly impregnating the same woman. It's good for him maybe, but it's not good for her. A woman having babies with multiple men spreads her genes out. What if the one man she's married to and never had sex with anybody else has a genetic defect? then
True.
that genetic defect is going to get propagated potentially in all of her children.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if she just has one child with a different man every 4 or 5 years, by the time she's had 5 or 6 kids, she's spread her genes out and there's no bad gene getting propagated except in maybe one child.
Mm-hmm.
It's a genetic strategy that kind of answers your question. What if we were in a what if we were in a matriarchal society? If we were, the women would be having babies with different men.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's go on to one other. Is this interesting to you?
No, that makes sense. Yeah. No, that totally
okay.
makes sense.
Then let's go to one other example in South America. There are 28 out of 46 cultures in the Amazon that believe in something called partible paternity.
Mm-hmm.
I bet you've never heard of partible paternity. Okay. Well, if I was a primitive scientist in the Amazon and I looked at my dog and I noticed that if my female dog was mating with multiple males and then having a litter, I would think maybe it takes multiple males to make a healthy litter.
Mm-hmm.
I would see a peccary, for example, a female mating with multiple males and then having one baby. And I would think maybe it takes multiple males to have a healthy baby.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a primitive scientific observation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, evidently, these 28 tribes in the Amazon have the same notion. They believe you cannot have a healthy baby if you don't have sex with 3 or 4 men. So the same woman will have sex with multiple men, and then when she has the baby, she'll have 3 or 4 men who all think that's their baby.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they have a vested interest in protecting that baby.
Mm-hmm.
And the woman has the healthy baby, and she says, well, I have the healthy baby because I had sex with all these men.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will.
Mm.
So it's not a matriarchal society necessarily, but genetically speaking, it's going to create a nice mix of genes from the woman's perspective. Mm-hmm. So the reason I wrote Sex and God was to point out these very things, that we're so used to the notion of Christian monogamy, we don't realize there's a whole hell of a lot of other ways to be sexual. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole other practices to be sexual that are just as valid. There's nothing wrong with the way the Hadza do it, nothing wrong with the way the Muoso do it, nothing wrong with the Amazonian tribes do it. That's just another expression of sexuality.
Right. I love it. It's just so multifaceted. There's no right or wrong way. It's just a way. And whatever works for you is good enough.
And I tell people that are trying to deal with religious trauma in their sex lives, in their sexuality, that you have to invent your own sexuality.
Right.
Everything I've just mentioned here is an illustration of the breadth of our sexual capacity. And we all have our own individual limits. I mean, there's certain things that I'm not interested in. So it's a limit for me. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of other things I am interested in. Well, if I'm taught as a Catholic that only this amount of sex is appropriate, then I'm going to miss all of this stuff over here that I could be experiencing. I might still be limited over here. I'll never like that. But all this stuff I'm missing because the Catholic Church told me it's wrong. Mm-hmm. For example, one of the most fun times I've ever had was having threesomes. I love having threesomes. Mm-hmm. They're fun. They're enjoyable. Everybody has a great time. I have never had a bad threesome, and I've had a ton of threesomes. So why shouldn't people enjoy that? Who got harmed in the making of that movie? Right. There was no... And no, I don't make movies of my threesomes. So the fact is, you are allowing a religion from the day you're born. You're allowing a religion to tell you what you can and can't do, who you can and can't love, what kind of sex you can and can't have. Who the hell is a religion telling you that? Yeah. There's no religion on this planet that is biologically informed about human sexuality.
Yeah. But what is this overall purpose as to why I mean, I know religion just wants to propagate, but what is their, like, why do they want to control the masses? Why does it want to propagate in the first place? Like, what is the larger vision that they have?
It keeps the tribe together.
Yeah.
It keeps the tribe together. We don't have tribes as much as we used to. We can't identify, I got this tattoo because that means I belong to your tribe, or I wear this headdress, that means so we don't have that component of self-identification. What we now have is religion. I wear a cross. A cross says I'm a Catholic. A cross says I'm a Christian or whatever. That's some of our identification. But what religion has done is religion has learned that if I can control your sexuality, I can keep you infected with the God virus.
Mm-hmm.
It works around something I call the guilt cycle. See, the religion simply, if you understand evolutionary biology, you can understand religion much better. The key to understanding religion is to understand evolutionary biology.
Mm-hmm.
The COVID virus is not a conscious thing. It doesn't have willpower. It's not trying to do anything.
Okay.
We as humans use that language of will and trying and intention, but that's not really the way biology works. But I'm going to use the language here just so you understand what I'm trying to say. The COVID virus wants to get from my nose into your lungs. That's what it wants to do. And then once it gets into your nose and into your lungs, it's going to create lots of coughing and other things that will then bring the virus back out so that it can get into the next person's lungs. As I said earlier, the Jehovah's Witnesses knock on your door. They're trying to sneeze on you, just like a cold or a COVID virus is trying to get from one person to the next. The religions want to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to step back and say, religions are not a conscious thing. All they are is an entity that wants to get from one brain to the next brain.
Mm-hmm.
A religion is a brain infection.
Mm-hmm.
Mormonism is a brain infection.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't like that terminology, just look at history. Religions are all the time using the word infection and disease. And they're saying, we see the religious right now trying to say we don't want a Muslim infection in our culture. They use those terms. In the Middle Ages, they would use Jews, the Jewish religion, and they would call it an infection.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to eliminate. That's where the whole notion of genocide comes from.
Mm-hmm.
in Nazi Germany. That Judaism was a religious infection. So even the religious people use this idea.
Mm-hmm.
And all I'm saying is all religions are an infection of the brain. And the religion wants to get from one brain to the next.
Mm-hmm.
How does it do that? Well, the best way to do is control your sexuality.
Mm-hmm. Every
Every cell in your body is sexual. Everything. You are a sexual creature.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can control that, I control you. It is really that simple.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds almost too simple,
Mm-hmm.
but it is.
Mm-hmm. So this is probably going to be the last question. I really want to touch on this as to religious LGBTQIA plus members, and the effect that they don't even, that they aren't even conscious of when, as they're in the, like, why even practice religion if they understand what has been said about, the way that how they choose to live their lives, and like, how do they manage that relationship? It doesn't compute.
It doesn't make sense. If you look at it rationally, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
But religion isn't rational.
Yeah.
And to try and understand it from a rational perspective is to totally miss the mark.
Okay.
And you'll go down the wrong alley all the time.
Yeah.
So let's go back here. I too see the horrible damage that religions do to the LGBTQ community. And yet I see people deeply religious who are gay, who are lesbian, who are bisexual, who are trans. So there must be something else going on there if they can be so deeply persecuted. Well, let's go back to early childhood training. I worked with, early in my career, I was a child psychologist and I did a lot of family work. In my entire career, I never saw, I saw a lot of abused children, but in my entire career, I never saw one abused child say anything except, I love my mother, I love my father. They had been beaten silly. They had been spanked terribly, bruised. They may have cigarette marks on them. And yet they will still say, I love my mother, I love my father. Now that defies rationality. But think about this. A child at that stage is totally dependent upon the parent for survival. So our species has been genetically programmed to listen very carefully and to our parents. If my parent says, don't go over there because a lion will eat you, I better listen to him or I won't be here tomorrow. If my parent, so the kids that listen to their parents at those early stages in life, up to 5 or 7 years of age, they've survived today. You and I are the product of kids that listen to their parents. The kids that didn't listen to their parents wandered off and got eaten by a hyena. They're not here to tell the story, right? I mean, that's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Now let's go the other side. The parent says, don't go over there because there's demons underneath that bush. Don't read that book because the devil will get in your... Don't talk to those people because they will infect you with Jehovah's Witnesses or whatever. So when the parent says, don't do that, at the same time as they're saying, don't do this, the child has no way to discriminate. They don't know which is true. I mean, surely don't go over there and get eaten by the lion, but don't go over there and get eaten by the devil either. The child has no way to discriminate. So children are so dependent that they deeply believe, and well into adulthood, they still believe this shit. Well, that LGBTQ person was raised religious, and they were told over and over again, you're going to go to hell if you do X, Y, or Z. You're a bad person. Your body's your enemy, all this stuff. Remember I told you I didn't know one kid that ever said, I hate my parents, that had been abused? Well, that's what the LGBT persons, they've been so bonded to the notion that they can't leave it and they can't feel comfortable and they're scared to death of leaving religion because they don't want to go to hell. And yet they know they're going to go to hell because they're gay.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of what we know as cognitive dissonance. Yeah. What are you thinking?
Oh, it's just, it hurts my brain. Like, I'm trying to empathize and I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, because I fall on that spectrum and I definitely, I grew up religious and so I still feel that shame, whether I want to, admit it or not. But I'm more openly reject it now. Right.
And you're practicing challenging boundaries.
Right.
The story you told earlier that's the more you challenge the boundaries, the easier this is going to get for you.
Yeah, I do. Yep. I do challenge that cognitive dissonance quite a bit. And I think that it even though she was offended by it, it kind of, it stirred something inside of her to be curious, and it kind of attracted her to me, which was, I planted the seed. Plant the seed.
Exactly. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Plant seeds, whether she ever agrees with you or not is irrelevant.
Right.
You planted a seed for her to start thinking more creatively, opening her mind a little bit to other opportunities. So I hope as a result of this, if we have some LGBTQ plus people watching or listening, that they look at their own childhood indoctrination and maybe understand that their feelings about their body, feelings about other things related to who they are and what their body is counter to what most religions teach. And you want to take a moment and think about that and question that. There's one other component. Well, we can talk about this another time, but I know we're running late and I need to move on myself. So it was
Yeah.
all good questions. Good
Yeah, that
questions.
was really
Fun talking
fun.
to you today.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time.
And I'm guessing there's a few things I want to highlight. What are some things you had never heard about today in our talk?
Well, hidden estes and the
Estrus. Hidden estrus.
hidden
Right,
estrus, and the, what did you call it? The pair
bonding.
bonding. Yeah. That was
Yeah.
really interesting because
Okay.
it makes sense from a biological level. If you look at it, I
Right,
love
right.
looking at the science behind it, because instead of
Right.
just kind of, hypothesizing, like there is some serious fact behind what you're saying today. And so, it makes more sense. It dissolves that dissonance for me, because the science
Hopefully,
is there.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And try to memorize a few of these cultures, because they are the exception to all this Christian bullshit.
Right.
The Muoso culture, the Hadza culture, the Amazonian cultures, the partible paternity, the Iroquois women who can vote, but the men can serve. I mean, these are all different ways of looking at sexual relationships and gender. Oh, and by the way, there's all sorts of tribes in North America that had transgender people in them, and they had a role and a place in it.
Uh-huh.
So we will sign off for now. Like I said, I could have talked 3 hours today for this.
I'm so glad that we've crossed paths. This has been eye-opening and relieving for me.
Well, I think education helps people deal with the dissonance.
Absolutely.
And then it helps them helps them create their own sexuality.
Right.
That's
it
the only way
inspires
you're going
that
to be
free
happy.
thought.
Yep. Go out there and create your own sexuality.
I love it. Well, thank you again, Darrel.
You're welcome. Are we finished, or are we gonna do a third one?
I hope that you all enjoyed the episode today. This is part 2 of a part 4 series. Part 3 is going to be about recovering from religion and how to deprogram ourselves. I hope you guys stay tuned for the next episode. You can find more updates on episodes on thepsycho.com. Music is Face In It by Fallen for Autumn on Instagram. Go give her some love, and I hope to see you guys next time.
I want you to touch my body, let's get it. Now you wrap your hands around my waist and bury your first in it around while you decide. No, deny my soul, and let's rewind.